it's recording. Okay, so to make it formal, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special Zoom session of Art 414. Tonight's class is a bit different from our usual one because it's part of our collaborative online international learning exchange with Professor Sayako Ono's class at Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. A few of her, she says it's going to be a couple, but we have Kaya. I think you're the only one so far, right? So joining us live, and others will watch the recording later. So I would like to begin by warmly welcoming you, our guest. And I also want to remind everyone that this session is being recorded for our partners class. As you know, this week we turn to Chapter 7, Forging a New Identity, the Meiji Restoration and Japan's Entry into the Modern World. This is the end of the textbook, right? Congratulations, you get to read the whole textbook. And also a major transition point in the history of Japan, because we are moving into questions of modernity, westernization, nationalism, and cultural self-definition in Japan. Last time, right, Japan experienced something rapid and extensive social, political, and institutional transformation with profound impact was the Taika reforms, initiated in 645, if you remember that, right? Before the Nara period, more than 1200 years ago. That time, it was adopting Chinese models. This time, it was adopting Western models. I want to bring up a central point that the Mason makes in this chapter. She does not present modern Japan as a simple break from the past. Instead, she asks us to think about how new institutions, materials, styles, and systems of circulation emerged, while older forms were also reworked, preserved, redefined, and sometimes strategically mobilized both for good or bad intentions. As we move through tonight's summary presentations and discussions, I think you will see that this is not just a story of replacement. It is also a story of negotiation between old and new, local and foreign, national identity and international visibility, inherited forms and new cultural ambitions. We can see that across a wider range of visual material, from architecture, sculpture, to painting, print culture, ceramic, among others. As usual, I do not want to say too much in advance, because our summarizers and discussants will lead us into the chapter's main developments, arguments, and examples. But I do want to highlight one big question that should stay with us throughout the evening. What makes an artwork or artistic practice modern in Japan? Is modernity located in style, medium, institution, audience, ideology, technology, or some combination of some or all of these? The discussion questions for this chapter point us directly toward those issues. And this is where our exchange with Professor Ono's class becomes especially meaningful. Her course approaches Japanese culture through performance studies, with attention to the body, culture, gender, and both localized and globalized forms of performance. Next week, her lecture, Westernization and Tradition in Japanese Performing Arts, Classical Ballet and the Tea Ceremony, will examine how modernization and traditional Japan were promoted in parallel rather than simply opposed. Her materials also address the function of modern institutions, such as the Roku Meikan and the Imperial Theater, the different symbolic roles of Western high arts and traditional arts, and the ways gender, class, and traditional family systems, such as the Ie and the Iiemoto, shaped cultural participation and cultural expression. So one productive thing to keep in mind tonight is that issues we encounter in visual art do not stop with objects, buildings, or images. They also extend into performance, discipline, self-fashioning, and everyday cultural practice. In that sense, today's class and Professor Ono's upcoming lecture are in direct conversation with one another. Both ask how Japan confronted modernity, not by choosing simply between West and tradition, but by producing new cultural forms out of that tension. So with that, let us begin with summary presentations. So I was checking just a while ago that I saw Kaylin and Giovanni submitted their summary already. So, Kaylin, would you like to start?
Okay. Hi,
Yeah.
everyone.
Do you have something? You do you need
I don't
something?
have anything. And I'm on my
Okay.
phone because the mic on my laptop doesn't work either way.
I see. That's bad. But yeah, good luck with that. So let
Thanks.
me, yeah, so let me maybe let me have all the slides here, right? So if you need something, I can move things around for you.
Yeah, I marked like what slides I'll be kind of referencing to. So I'll just say kind of the slide number.
And I'll move around, sure.
Okay. Well, hi everyone. I think it's more intimidating over Zoom than in person. So here we go. Wait, can everyone hear me right? Because I'm on my phone.
Yes, I
Yes.
can
Yes,
hear
you're
you
good.
Okay,
correctly.
sweet.
Yep.
All right, so this chapter delves into the profound transformation of Japanese art and architecture from the Meiji Restoration, um, from in 1868 through the close of the 20th century. So it meticulously examines how Japan in its rapid assimilation into like a globalized contemporary world and how it underwent a significant cultural evolution. So the author begins to highlight the seismic shift that initiated the overthrow of the Tokugawa shogunate, which assisted in the era of intense westernization. So this period was characterized by what can only be described as like a long head passion for Western cultural elements. The Meiji government actively fostered this inclination by sponsoring Japanese students to pursue their education abroad and by extending invitations to Western experts to pass on their knowledge and teach innovative methodologies within Japan. Ironically, this period of intense adoption um, also coincided with like a reciprocated influence as Japanese art exerted a substantial impact on Western artistic movements as well. So there was like the cultural phenomenon known as Japanisme. So in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, um, these centuries kind of witnessed a transformation in Japanese like society, art, um, architecture, and it marked the dynamic tension between tradition and modernity. Modernity. Um, so this period saw a spirited debate unfold as new materials of Western influences challenged like already established and structural norms. So for architecture, the introduction of like novel building materials like brick, stone, and like reinforced concrete, this altered urban landscapes in Japanese cities. And this technological advancement prompted a period of experimentation. So the imperial crown style of the 1930s um, exemplified this fusion and integrated like like concrete structures with like silhouettes of traditional Japanese gabled roofs. So, but then in contrast, in slide two, um, we see the Akasaka detached palace. So this stood as like a testament to Western architectural models, and this demonstrated a complete embrace of European stylistic conventions. Then, like following World War II, architects like Kenzo Tange achieved like global approval by mastering like like synthesizing traditional Japanese like philosophies, and he integrated like cutting edge engineering and demonstrated like um, a more nuanced and recognized approach to modern Japanese culture. And we can see that in slide 6. So simultaneously, the author talks about um, significant intellectual and artistic dispute that emerged within the painting world, pitting two distinct schools kind of like against each other. So the Nihonga movement um, represented an ambitious effort to modernize traditional Japanese paintings. And so here we can see on slide 14 and 15 kind of what we're talking about. And so artists working within the school sought to imbue classical techniques with Western innovations, notably incorporating principles of perspective and shading while continuing to utilize like native materials at the same time, such as like silk and paper and like thoughtfully prepared like mineral pigments. So this approach aimed to create a contemporary Japanese art form that both distinctly national and that was like both distinctly and nationally like relevant. Um, but in contrast, like in direct opposition, the yoga artists um, completely like forged a different path, and we can see the contrast in slides 19 and 20. Um, so these artists often have like they studied in Europe and then like adopted the Western artistic methods, like embracing oil on canvas as like their primary medium. Kuroda Seki was a very pivotal figure within this movement and was very instrumental in introducing Impressionism and often controversial like academic nude into the Japanese art scene. This directly changed the existing aesthetic sensibilities. This period of intense like cultural dialogue, characterized by the assimilation and adaptation of foreign influences, alongside like preservation and reimagining of like indigenous traditions, laid the groundwork for vibrant and multifaceted artistic as well as architectural landscapes for modern Japan. The landscape of Japanese art underwent a huge transformation in the modern era, moving away from a singular focus on religious iconography. And it moved towards like a vibrant spectrum of artistic expression and embracing more global influences. This evolution clearly demonstrated through like diverse practices and philosophies. Of like key artists and movements, like sculpture, for instance, shifted from its means of like devotional roots to a potent means for like artistic vision. Uh, Takamura epitomized this like shift by masterfully employing traditional like wood carving techniques to render subjects with realism and like observation. And this is shown in slide 11. Um, and I think in slide 11, it's like the one furthest to the left. Um, this dedication to like craftsmanship while rooted in tradition allowed for new levels of individual interpretation. And simultaneously, artists like Ojiwara Mori, also in the same slide, I think it's like right next to like the one in the middle, um, began to integrate like Western notions of emotional expression into like their work. drawing significant inspiration um, from the French sculptor Auguste Rodin. So this kind of like cross-pollination of ideas marked a departure from purely aesthetic considerations and then pushed towards a deeper philosophical and emotional um, territory. But beyond sculpture, the chapter also explores the impact of folk craft movement, the Minji. Um, so this was like a cornerstone of the 20th century Japanese artistic thought, led by Yanagi. Um, this movement emerged as like a direct response to the huge wave of industrialization, and it promoted unconscious beauty that was found in everyday like handcrafted objects. And then it also celebrated the skill and dedication of like anonymous artisans. And then I noted slide 9. So, and then during this movement, the philosophy um, influenced the develop of contemporary Japanese like textiles and ceramics, and imbuing these crafts with like an appreciation for the inherent aesthetic qualities and the human touch involved within their creation. And following World War II, Japanese artists further broadened their horizon, actively engaging with and reinterpreting global like artistic waves. And this enthusiastically explored styles such as like abstract expressionism, surrealism, and conceptual art. So integrating these international expressions into like a unique artistic language. Um, so this period kind of witnessed a radical redefinition of artistic media, painting and calligraphy. In slide 23, completely transcend all like traditional boundaries, transforming into like acts of physical performance. So calligraphers like Marita Shiruyu, um, and like groups such as Gutai, um, fearlessly push the limits of conventional forms and kind of challenging already established notions of artistic practice. Um, so the author kind of further highlights like just completely the emergence of new art forms and like artistic media. So like the rise of photography and video art provided like artists with novel ways to capture and manipulate reality. Finally, the exploration of like obsessional installations like artist Kusama Yayoi. So this artist offers like a compelling kind of conclusion. So their artworks are immersive and multi media environments kind of delve into intense themes of like infinity and complex human psyche. So this kind of showcases like a bold, innovative engagement of contemporary artistic um, disclosure. And so together, these artistic endeavors paint like a rich and dynamic picture of modern Japanese art, and like the whole journey from its traditional foundations to a more like prominent position on a global stage.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, excuse me, not Karen, Karen. Okay, awesome, great. Okay, so comments. Luis, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to say that I really like your presentation. I really enjoyed how you ended up, not really focusing so much on, describing every single work because, there was a lot of different, styles that have been developed during this era. So the fact that you ended up actually explaining, back and forth some of the works and, actually making connection between them, I think it was a nice way to actually describe what was actually happening around that time. So pretty well done.
Thank you, Luis. Go ahead. Yeah. Kaya.
So, hello. That was a really amazing presentation, and especially as someone who sees some of this art walking around Tokyo, it definitely is really interesting to see the different forms of how kind of the ideas of Europe and Asia kind of mix together in this like expressionism of art in Japan. Yeah, so I really liked all the different types of art that you showed, like the pottery and the paintings, and also just like photography and also like the buildings. You definitely see those a lot around in Tokyo. You could see like how they kind of mix the big grand gestures of the buildings, while also kind of combining that traditional Japanese like kind of like traditional style there too. So very good presentation, and yeah, I hope you get to visit those monuments soon.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Shazza.
Yeah, I like the presentation. You did a great job, especially in the beginning. The framing of it really helps get a grasp of like just like the whirlwind that's about to happen in the development, all these different media. I think if you wanted to like build on that too, I think like adding in some details because like in this chapter, it's like each media has its own kind of like each medium has its own unique story of like how exactly the development took place. So like adding in little tidbits here and there could like tie back to that framework you set in the beginning, make it like
Mm,
even stronger.
right. Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. Anyone else? Ashley, please.
I also thought that was a very strong point of your presentation was how you incorporated those broad strokes throughout the many different mediums that were going on or being developed during this time. But I feel like to get into the nuance of some of these like tensions that were going on, it would be great to see like a comparison between two of the artworks. And I think like it didn't have to be for each one because I know that would be impossible to do. But going a little deeper on just one or two and comparing them would have been great to see.
Okay, thank you.
Wonderful point, right? Anyone else would like to say something? Share your thoughts?
I was gonna say when I was looking over the chapter, I kind of went more into the kind of architectural things of like how architecturally things kind of changed and evolved, like going on to like how it kind of balanced out with architecture and traditional balance as well. But I like how you went back and forth, like they were saying, between the different kind of pieces of going with these big broader pieces as well as kind of going into these much smaller um, aspects and how those kind of shifted throughout the different mediums.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We get one more person to share your thought. Kaylin's summary.
I really, really appreciated how Caitlin brought up how Japan impacted the rest of the world on top of being impacted by Europe, because I feel like it's an intentional powerhouse that actually has a wide scope, and I really appreciate how we talked about the bouncing back and how it was a cross-cultural exchange and not simply the West taking over Japan's art forms. I found that really, really impactful.
Thank you, Ryan. Okay. Anyone else? Anyone
I'll
else?
talk. All right. So what was surprising during the presentation was seeing the nudes because like that was related to the Western art because like back when I was doing the other art history back in the fall of 2025, we did see a lot of photos depicting the nude of men and women. Yeah. That's what
Thank
really surprised me in Japanese art, seeing this.
Mhm.
Right. That's their effort to westernize or they call modernize their art, right? By adopting subject matters that were not there. I'm not saying, and it's not the the reality that nude was not painted in Japan, but it was regarded as like a porn. It's like it's not supposed to be for public viewing, public consumption. They were circulated in the underground, right? But now it's being exhibited in a public space, like that makes a big difference, right? And I think Kaylin did mention. Do you want to comment on that?
Me?
Yeah, this topic, right? The nudity and the controversial.
Yeah,
issue.
like it wasn't that nudity didn't exist, but it was depicted in a more, like, I almost want to say like a more modest way. Like it was covering up certain things or even the poses of like women. It was completely different. It's not that it didn't exist. So, and then moving into like how Western art kind of started creeping in, and then you see a shift in how the scene was depicted. Like women were now exposing more, or the poses were completely like shifted. So I think people just started seeing more, I guess, more explicit than what traditional Japanese like nude art would look like. And so because it was transitioning, it was new and it was bold. So yeah, it just wasn't that it didn't exist. It just was painted in different lights now.
Right, I think so too, right? And because nudity is such an important part of European artist tradition, right? Regarded as form of high art, subject matter has been depicted again and again, right? So for artists who are deeply influenced by Western thoughts, they want to break. They want to open that, right? They want to make that also accessible in Japan. In a sense, they actually were under a mission of educating Japanese public, right, to accept new subject matter, including nudity, right, as like a form to study, right? Right. Thank you, Kaylin, and thank you for all of you who commented, right? And Giovanni, I believe I saw your submission, your summary already. Would you mind to share your summary?
Yeah, of course. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, I just wanted to start off by saying that something that Cesar said was very important to my understanding of the chapter was that it was kind of like preparing us for the whirlwind of everything that would occur. And I found that to be very true. When I was writing my summary and as I'm presenting it now, something that I think Penelope Mason is arguing is that the Japanese art during this Meiji period is not solely like westernized. Um, but it's kind of like deliberately constructed by the choices that not only the artists make, but the institutions about like what to be inspired by, and then kind of like what to reject. And yeah, it's interesting to see how these things kind of redefine and are put to develop this identity of Japan in the modern era. So as I was reading it, something I also noticed was that Mason uses these through lines to kind of help us adjust as they go through all of these different aspects of art that are altered. And these through lines being, as we heard from the previous summary, is that the broad movements of yoga, which is the Western style of painting or application, Nihonga, which is the modernized traditional painting and application, as well as something called Minget, which is the folk craft movement. So these three are kind of all seen throughout the different changes that we see. And all of these are kind of a reaction to the inspiration from the West. And we'll see that later on in the chapter, Mason also gives us new movements that are reactions to these older movements. So it's interesting to see that the kind of structure of the chapter is to kind of give us all these different changes, the reaction to those changes, and then we continue with change. So it's very kind of all over the place, but I really enjoyed it. So the first one that we should go over is architecture. Mason states that the government had masters from the West being sent over to Japan to teach the workers about their methodology, that we can obviously see their influence as stated, but something particularly that was introduced was the idea of steel reinforced concrete architecture. And then here, right, as we see with the concrete and the brick, it's also interesting to then see the reaction of this method of building, because of the earthquakes that happened, the concrete buildings fared worse than the traditionally built um, buildings. So that is like a means of like, I guess, an example of how reaction is always in this new modernization era. And this was the very introduction of like a really big question that Mason has throughout the entirety of the chapter, which is like, what is the role of tradition in the arts of Japan? They gave a really good example, which is like, should indigenous forms of traditional theater like kabuki be housed in these Western style buildings? So as that question is posed, we kind of go on to pottery and sculpture. And that is kind of the main introduction of the Minge movement, which is this idea of like folk craft movement that emphasizes the um, anonymous artists that are making the wares in traditional ways. Yeah, something that I found extremely interesting that Mason talks about in um, pottery and especially in sculpture is there's this like ideological change as this new government in this era like the state support of Buddhism is removed. So now there's sculptures that have, as much as they are art, they want to push an idea of ideology or, religion. So now the big shift and the big introduction from the West is like this idea of a personal statement within your sculptural art. Um, so I found that fascinating, especially with like they had a little excerpt. I don't want to mispronounce the artist's name, but there was this artist who was brought in from the West and he was teaching the students um, as we've mentioned, in these massive institutions, many little institutions that were sprouted from this time. But he was saying that he found difficulty in the students, I guess their ability to see things in 3D space. Um, but we see that the main kind of difference is the materials used, as Japanese art utilized wood, as we mentioned, the wood sculpting, as well as bronze. Um, and moving on, I'm sorry I can't cover all of these as much as I'd want to, is painting, where Mason breaks it up into three sections with the Bunjinga, Zenga, and Haiga. Um, so yeah, as we stated, that one of the main introductions was oil, and some artists really dove into it while others rejected it. So that's, you kind of have that yoga and the Nihonga conflicting with one another, but also working in tandem. There were some artists who, through painting, developed their own styles, which kind of grabbed a little bit of both. One of the artists uh, that I particularly found interest in, I don't know if it's here, I believe it's named Portrait of Mrs. F, if I'm not mistaken, Mrs. P. But it was this portrait. I'm not sure. Yes, the one on the Mrs. F, yes, on the right. So something that was very interesting to me about this is the combination of the two aspects. So, okay, let me see how I can explain this. So obviously the materials used here are not the traditional calligraphy style of brushwork. This is also an example of a new movement that came in where there were less of an emphasis on like lines, so filling in and having that be like blocks of color being the defining thing. Also, I believe it was the poses that this particular person had. The poses were, if I'm not mistaken, it's like a very Japanese pose, if I'm not mistaken. I don't want to misinterpret that, but the pose itself was Japanese, but also her clothing is very American and westernized. So this is just like a very clear example that Mason gives of not only Nihonga and Yoga conflicting with one another, but instances where they also combine. Um, yeah, as well, we see in other images of the paintings that there is this exploration um, of Western realism being perspective, light and shadow. And then they obviously, right, they drew inspiration from their previous artworks that was very focused on nature and created something new, as we see here, right? With this kind of different oil painting, different brush strokes, but they're creating something new. All right, I would like to go on to our next iteration and change, which is the wood block prints, which I am usually not a fan of wood block prints, but these ones are very interesting to me because they're very gory and dark, which I loved. Mason explains that this was kind of a reaction to the two wars, the Sin Japanese and the Russo Japanese wars that were causing a shift in this subject matter, as they like illustrated battles and kind of folklore that was a little darker. We also see, right, how kind of this opening to the West and Westernization, how like social and economic things affect art as foreigners having more travel access to Japan and it being a tourist destination. The woodblock industry kind of wanted to appear more appealing to the foreigners. So there were specific things and methods that they would, subject matters that they would try to implement and create more of to adhere to this different Western audience that they were, and this kind of helped because it helped, I guess, broadly foreign wise, and it helped domestically because the woodblock artworks that they were making were very focused on the Mingei movement, which is like being a part of all aspects of your creation. So they made, the wood, they carved it, all the materials. Some would even make their own ink. So domestically, that was kind of seen as like favored because they're holding on to tradition. And then finally, I would like to talk about the introduction, the medium of photography, which I love as a photographer. All of this was amazing to hear about. I'm so sad that, this is the last chapter and we get a little bit of photography, but it was very interesting that this was introduced as a form of personal expression. There were, as it opened to the West, there were individuals that came, and domestically as well as abroad, there were studios set up to take portraiture and to work on these I guess like commercial things, right, for people, but it was seen and it started to shift as a means to express personal ideas and like personal statements. And it was like, I guess because this was after the war and there was a lot of restrictions that were lifted, this was the chosen media to push boundaries, especially for I believe it's I believe it's God, I don't want to miss assign the movement, but for like performance art, I believe that's the correct term. Performance art used it a lot. We see images like this where people are taking images of, performances and that's the chosen media, which kind of like cemented itself in the beginnings, right? In the beginnings of photography being introduced, it was cemented as the medium for performance art and like dancing, which I found very interesting because you would assume it would be like motion picture, but Mason explains that it was like a cost thing, and that's just kind of how things occurred. There's a lot of backstory to that, but I think I'm running out of time. So yeah, this is all very interesting. That there were a lot of developments that was contrast to the acceptance and the rejection. And Mason kind of closes off the book by saying that Japanese art is not only alive and well, but confidently embarking onto their future. Thank you.
Thank you, Giovanni. Okay. Comments, questions, conversations? Yes, go ahead, Ashley.
Sorry, that was meant to be a clapping emoji reaction.
It's okay. I'm sure you have something to say. So,
I really liked how Giovanni formatted his summary, just based on like having an own section for architecture, painting, woodblock prints, photography. I really heard like the author's voice, or there was a an attention to having that in his summary, especially with like hopefully like I caught him saying like I hope I interpreted this right, or based on what the text was talking about, which I think is really good for a summary.
Thank you, Ashley. Anyone else? Please share your comment, question. No?
I like how it felt. His summary felt more like a kind of just like a here's some interesting kind of cool stuff, but also not just going like completely factual of like what's verbatim in like here's this reason this was done by this thing and this is so on and so forth. He structured it more in a way of stuff that he thought was interesting, um, rather than it being in a specific order of like, and this is the exact reason why this happened. This is the exact reason why this happened because, um, uh, like these chapters are long, and so you obviously aren't going to have a chance to look through. Well, you're going to look through everything, but you don't want to put everything, in the summary. So being able to go, oh, this looks cool, and kind of the way he picked out what he wanted to talk about was kind of cool. Because like I said, these chapters are long and you can't really go through everything in extreme detail. So
Thank you, Luis. Anyone else? Adrian.
Yeah, I kind of like how he like kind of emphasized on like putting in categories because he did talk about like the architecture. He also talked about like the paintings, and he also talked about the photography. And I like how he correlates all three of them into like topics like it relates to the world right around them. So like same for the architecture where they have like frequent earthquakes, and they kind of adapted to that to still build this modernity building for to keep it and still intact and beautifully designed, no matter what the circumstance is. It kind of gave them an idea to keep going through like what they're passionate about. And I also like the fact that he kind of emphasized a little bit in his voice in this too, because I know he was like kind of like skeptical of what to say next, but his voice was showing more about like the passion too here, where he actually like kind of correlates both three of the points here that he kind of like articulated about. And I kind of like how he was going emphasis on each of them, and I kind of like how he correlates back to like the historical background of like how these kind of reflect back on the things they have about them, and the photography too with the Western ideas, how they had adapted to that as well.
Thank you, Adrian, for the comment. Anyone has a wish? Like you were wishing to hear something but you did not get to hear yet from the two summaries?
I kind of touched on this on mine, where a lot of the art pieces, especially like the pottery and or the ceramics and some of the other smaller pieces, is that they were made cheaply and in a way that would be kind of eye-catching to Western audiences because they put on these festivals, right? At some time. So I think it's interesting that not only do like you have this exchange of cultures in a sense of like it's not just a one-sided of here's all the Western stuff we're pushing it all into into Japan. It's more of a oh, this is what I learned from this thing. This is what this kind of a back and forth of like the two kind of cultures wanted to learn from each other, but also found a way to make it so that they could benefit from one another without feeling like there wasn't an equal trade.
Thank you, Luis.
Yeah.
Do we have anyone who can ask Giovanni a question?
Oh,
A question, like, how did
right.
he,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyone can ask Giovanni a question or Kaden a question. Do you have any question for them?
I might have a question.
Go ahead.
So you talked about your love of photography, which was absolutely fantastic. Do you know what type of photography they were doing? If it was like tintype, or if they had moved into, I guess, more modern photography?
Yeah, I don't know the particulars. I mean, I believe they had some because I took I took a history of photography when I was studying abroad in Japan, and they did mention some like brief instances of them using like different cyanotypes and daguerreotypes. But so it was kind of in a weird moment where all of these different types of photography were converging, but then they found like a common medium, which would be like, you know, the ones you see in media all the time, which is like the large format where they had the little, the little stand, and they had the big box, and then they would get like the little like sheet and put it over their head and then go, okay, smile, and then big flash. So those ones were more commonly used in like the studios that I mentioned were set up when the borders were opened and foreigners and domestic individuals set up their own photography shop. Those were the ones that were used for portraits of like families and things. Um, so yeah, it was like a kind of a mix of everything, but it all fell towards going into like large format and film. And then we see, they kind of go uh and advance their cameras to have, film cameras that are like 35 millimeter and, different ones. But yeah, um like the images here, you can't do that with a cyanotype, nor could you really do that with like one of those big sheet over your head, little button with the flash. This is more of like a modern one, modern relative to what they had. But it started with something kind of archaic and it developed into like kind of what we see now.
And how about this?
That one I would say um is like a one of those old ones. You can kind of definitely tell in the grain. It's like not as sharp as the other images, which makes me think that it's one of those large format cameras that were difficult to focus in on a person, because it wasn't like you could focus and then like look at it. You had to focus it, put the drape over your head, and then take the image. But I would definitely say, especially 1961, one of those older ones. But that is just purely me guessing. I have no idea. Um, don't take my word as the gospel.
But you definitely know more about the photography than I do, so it definitely is informative. Anyone
Thank
else?
you.
Yeah, that's definitely bringing your personal experience inside to really to enrich our understanding of the development of photography in Japan, right? If we don't have any comments, questions, maybe we can go for another summarizer, right? If your summary it takes quite a different approach. Anyone? And you would like to share with us?
I mean, mine goes more on kind of like the background of what altered the shift of kind of like it helped introduce the more traditions of like.
How about us hear it, if you
Okay.
don't mind?
Yeah. So for mine, I kind of just touched on you have like this whole era is transformative. So like the chapter discusses the transformation the Japan takes with new technologies, new architecture, painting, and different techniques like that. And then during this time there was a shift in government with there was assassinations with individuals who the kind of helped push this forward, and then within that these Western elements kind of, I don't know, seeped into Japan, whereas it continued to influence decorative arts. And so the governments played a really big part in this, where the different regions wanted to again take this power of intricate supremacy, which meant that they were going after the emperor in Kyoto, and the Shishi were tasked with who were the men of determination. Their initial focus was to expel the, as it says in the book, expelling the barbarians, uh, and assassinating figures within the Tokugawa uh, Bakufu, as well as foreigners, but that ended up not being as well thought out as they as they planned it, because they ended up bombing in retaliation the town of Kogashima, and they kept trying to overthrow them, and eventually was I think it was around the late, all the way up until like the late 1860s, and then I believe it said 1868 they finally overthrew them and the shogun, uh, overthrew the Bakufu and the shogun, which led to an emperor who was 17 years old, who's the movement is named after, Meiji, and they did things like renaming Edo to Tokyo, promoting more Westernization, giving more heavily military presence. They initially had like a foreigner ban that they implemented, but they backed that off because they realized that they could use them to help strengthen their technological feats, and kind of help introduce them to more westernized approaches to aspects that could help them lead. And so another thing too is that they continued, like, the westernization showed up in shops and homes, taking more of a modern look, close to the 19th century Western architecture. I don't know if this is in the PowerPoint, but they had their clothing, styles were influenced by that. So that they started wearing, actually both Western, it was common to see both Western style clothing and traditional Japanese style clothing around. And
And these are typical, right, Western style, no, clothing. We are looking at the military uniform
yeah,
being westernized.
and so other aspects of architecture changed. They brought in trams and wires that allowed for the advancements of electricity throughout Japan. Although this doesn't mean they disregarded it completely, like their traditions completely, because they still had the balance of it with modern implementations, so that this can be seen because they can use their use of, they use tatami mats in indoor areas, and Japanese architectures were also also looking towards Western styles as an influence in the era, which helped blend, kind of showing that blend of Japanese architecture and Western architecture. So it wasn't uncommon to see kind of a clash of that potentially. So they were each kind of like taking and pulling influence from each other. I could talk about earlier a little bit that the Meiji introduced the ideas of international exhibitions, because they were already huge in the West, because they were able to see things from places that might have not been that they couldn't have been able to go to, or could rarely get a chance to go to. This includes, it influenced movements such as, in the West, such as Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, and Symbolism. And then following this era, a couple of things came out of it, especially with decorative arts, and due to the craze of Japanese arts in the Western side, it made it possible for Japan to show off their work with ceramics, metalworking, and lacquer. Uh, One of the notable ceramic pieces that was created was by Yabu Mason, whose specialty was using, I think it's gilt designs in their painting on ceramic pieces, which of they used low fired uh, to make low fired earthenware vessels, and then The vessels themselves were called Satsuma, and they were made in mind with export. And the purpose of these vessels was like they were very colorful and made very cheaply, so that they could be captive for eye, like so that they could make a profit off of them. And they were something that they knew could catch Western's eyes because they were brightly colored. Part of the reasons they were developed was due to the fact that Europe's porcelain uh, was because Europe's porcelain wares became so popular. So there's kind of I don't want to say like I think there was a form of kind of I guess competitiveness of like we can do that too. At least that's what I got from it. And because of that, that became, you know, is something that's f familiar. From what I gather, like it's something that was probably familiar to them, so that's probably what made it so much of a high value uh, target for the uh, export market. And then another item that came out of this era was an elephant shaped sensor, and this piece was yeah, it's good. The image on the far left there, uh, and it was made for a school of sword guard makers, and the piece was a great way to showcase their metal inlaying techniques. So due to the everything being kind of sellable and uh exchanging for let's see, yeah. So, yeah, due to the sales of these art pieces at expeditions, it gave these artists that made these pieces actually kind of a leg to stand on in this domestic market. Just kind of show like, hey, look what we can do. And it gave these pieces were also actually sold back to people from Japan because they were something that they were interested in as well, not just for Western audiences, which was interesting to find out. Um, and that these types of craftsmen became popular enough that there was a system of craftsmen appointed to, you know, the higher courts called Teichitsu Gaigen. And yeah, overall, the influence in, I don't think I covered this too, but they also, yeah, the impact of the culture as a whole, uh, from its, architectural signage and military power to its markets and stalls and coming up with uh, ways to both improve their life and make a profit as well as giving, uh, they're embracing Western ideas while also balancing their own without kind of stripping their own identity. It was really interesting to see.
Thank you, Luis. Okay, comments, because Luis really deals with this chapter from a quite different perspective, right? So, any comments? Yes, Luis, go ahead.
I wanted to clap. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
No, I mean, I just wanted to say that it was really interesting to, get your perspective. It's more of a, technical aspect of it. So just understanding, the context behind it and, actually going through the analysis of how these different pieces of art and type of mindset towards positive aspect towards a Western culture ended up adapting to the Japanese type of style because there has been a lot of schools and type of interpretations that try to, make a balance or straight away just ignore them. So I think you, by seeing how you describe, their process and how they actually thought about those, those different styles, I think makes me, understand it even more. So understand, their mentality in that sense.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you.
you, Luis. Yeah, I think you introduced the institutional aspect, right, of the transformation, right? The institutional aspect, the market, the exhibition, right, and then the new system, right, honor those people who have traditional craft skills, right, who were actually marginalized because of modernization. They were marginalized because they were originally serving the whole samurai class, but now the entire samurai class was abolished. Their skills are no place to go, right? So now they have to turn to the market. They have to turn to this international expose. Fortunately, they had that, right? And so some of them were able to actually still make a living and carry on their traditional craftsmanship. And then fortunately, I think gradually, after the government was trying to be like everything westernized, but then they realized that I think it was some or more or less admired by actually a lot of European, American intellectuals. They realized, okay, we have something extinct the tradition, we still actually should preserve, we should keep it on. And so they introduced some systems, some cultural systems that actually help to preserve traditional craftsmanship and provide a livelihood for those marginalized craftsmen. Right? So I like you bring in your understanding from that angle. Anyone else like to have a comment? We can take one more comment and then we can have a break. Anyone? One more comment? People have been quiet. Brianna, what do you have something to say?
Yeah, I think that the way that Reese structured his summary was definitely different, and I like the different like artworks that he chose, and I like how he explained or at least tried to explain like a lot of the context of like what was going on with each different artwork. So I thought that was pretty well like thought out.
Thank you. So in the context of the summary presentation here, those summaries are complementing each other, right? And supplementing each other. That in a sense really enrich our understanding of what the author Mason trying to cover, right? She covers so much, right? So each of you can only really focus on certain aspects of it. But when we just get to listen to three summaries, so I think we get to be exposed to a kind of broad range, right? We can have a break of 10 minutes. Okay, so we come back. So now it's 7:14. We can come back at 7:25. Let's get some rest, right? Facing the screen so long, it's not a comfortable thing, right? So let's get some rest. And I'm going to play music.
All right, we'll be back.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello. All right, so I have the question here, and I just realized, Karen, you asked the question. No, you asked for the questions. Karen, are you still here?
Yeah, I was
Okay.
asking for the question that you posted on the third slide that you were presenting.
Is the one that I'm showing here, right? Is that what you're asking?
No, the one that we had to think throughout the class.
Yeah. Every week, right? The last slide. Is that what you're asking?
No, it was like on the first three slides on the presentation you gave, like the beginning of the class.
Is this the one?
Yeah, it's that one.
And what questions you're...
It was the one that you said to keep in mind throughout the class.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
key
that one.
question for tonight, right? So what makes an art work or artistic practice modern in Japan? Okay, so that's you can do a screenshot if you need it.
Yeah, I took a picture. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to open up breakout rooms for you guys to work together, right? For 10 minutes to quickly for the discussion, to quickly run through your response to not this one. Let me take down this one. Let me change. Okay, so this is the question, right? The question slide. So I'm going to give you at least 10 minutes in breakout room for the discussion to quickly really run through your response. It's all those that you feel like maybe the least confident, and see what kind of collective knowledge, wisdom you can gather from your group. So we'll do this way. If you are in group 1, you go to breakout room number 1. If you are in group 2, you go to breakout room number 2. Okay, so that you'll get to the right place. Let me know if you have any challenges. Now I think everybody is back. Well, how do you guys like the breakout room in comparison with our in classroom breakout groups?
It was interesting. I think it's
I might
just
have been
a matter of,
frustrated. Yeah.
getting used to it, but
It's like having a private conversation with your group mates.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. In our classroom, sometimes we can overhear, right, other groups' conversations.
yeah.
But here, no, right? You keep your space private. That's an interesting point. Yeah. Okay. So let's get started, right? Are you guys ready? I am going to invite Shazza to go with the first prompt.
Okay, um, so there's a ton of new ways of disseminating art making materials and the thoughts around it beginning the Meiji period. I'm not going to go into like every single one, but with like the opening to the West and cultural and exchange between them, a lot of new methods of art making and philosophy came in. Like we can see, um, for example, like with painting, you see a lot more like Western style realism. Um, Also, like Western professionals were invited uh, by the Japanese government to come and teach and do work in Japan. Japanese students were encouraged to go abroad, sometimes even subsidized by the government to do so, and bring back uh, different methods and approaches. One really striking example, like the ones I pulled specifically, like in architecture, the introduction of new building materials, such as steel and concrete construction methods, really brought about like a big shift in the architectural production. Um, for example, the Nihon Yusen building. I don't know if that's, yeah. Um, this was like an early, or that's, I think this was one of the earlier examples of a Western style construction in Tokyo. And then later on, different influences would merge from international sources. So, for example, the Yoyogi Stadium by Kenzo Tange shows a lot of influence from like the contemporary abstract minimalist designs. Also, uh, within like 3D media, for example, like with the bronze sculptures and stuff, before a lot of this exchange, it kind of hadn't been conceptualized as so much of a medium for individual artistic expression. So with the like approaches of Western artists and teachers and professionals, that kind of influenced Japanese artists to depart from the traditions of manufacturing sculpture, mainly either for like individual patrons and their specifications or Buddhist institutions. Kind of could depart more from that sort of strict, rigid structure to kind of develop more of an individual voice, like we see with the. I use this in a later question too. What's the name of it? The one with the cat, where he's holding up the cat? Um, for example, like the parts from that sort of like rigid structure, it focuses more on the impression and the weight and the physical phenomenon of holding the cat up. And then lastly, too, that also kind of changed in a lot of regards, especially with the Japanese government pushing to incorporate or to participate in international art exchanges and uh, curations and contests, along with the sudden dissolution of samurai and shonen classes, which had previously been the main patrons of a lot of craftspeople. It also kind of shifted the art making to new audiences, especially in the craft world. The next slide with the silver elephant and the lacquer box are really good examples of this kind of new focus on virtuosity to appeal to these international exhibitions and project like a sense of cultural development and identity. Um, so yeah, especially in these like kind of elite displays for international audiences, the focus on virtuosity became much more of a priority in these contexts. And like I said, in all mediums, there's like all sorts of new individual methods being imported and developed through cultural exchange too. But that's what I pulled from my examples.
Thank you, Shazza. That's great. Right. Definitely, I have no intention for you to cover everything, right? So it's actually you cited enough examples. That's awesome. Yeah. And I think you definitely mentioned new methods of art making, also dissemination. I definitely like you include the international exhibitions, the market, the dissolvement of the traditional patronage system, then the introduction of new ways. Like so now artists they indeed can make art for themselves in a sense, like individuality is being highlighted, right? They get to participate in gallery shows, in exhibitions, and then their personality, their kind of artistic talents, like if get recognized, and they also get to enter into what universities, like art schools, where they get to become teachers, like so. One door is closed, or multiple doors were closed, but new doors were opening for them to explore, right? Thank you for that. Next, I'd like to invite Xavier for prompt 2.
Hello, good evening, everybody. So
Good
for prompt
evening.
2, it asked, how did sculpture in Japan change after the Meiji Restoration? So first, I would um, say that the chapter just categorizes the Meiji Restoration through the transformation of sculpture because the Western concept of sculpture as um, almost an autonomous medium where the art itself was a personal statement. So that approach differed sharply from earlier Japanese practice. Before the Meiji, we know that three-dimensional work was largely three-dimensional work was sorry. So before the Meiji period, three-dimensional work was largely embedded in Buddhist image making. And we see it in the architecture of temple commissions, the decorative objects within them, and craft traditions. Um, After the restoration, you see the old patronage systems collapsing. So temple sponsorships decline and Buddhist institutions are attacked, and artisans working in wood, ivory, metal, and lacquer had to redefine the concept of sculpture in the Japanese context. That I feel like that's what the chapter distinguishes between traditional and modern sculpture. So if you look at work by Vincenzo Ragusa, you see how sculpture changed through the introduction of modeling from life in clay and plaster, where Western bronze casting and the use of wire amateurs in, were drawn from Ragusa. So these methods made realism, volume, and anatomy the central focus of the production of these works. And works like Ragusa's bust of Kiyohara Tama and Akuma Ujihiro, seated portrait of Fukusawa Yukichi. Those two show how portrait sculpture became a serious modern form with carefully observed surfaces and psychologically alert faces. Like if you look at Ragusa's bust of Kiyohara Tama, I just feel like she ha- sh- her face is emoting in almost, and we see that in Western approaches to capturing human emotion in um, the physical hardness of that medium. And so in the next stage, artists like Naganuma Moriyoshi and especially Asakura Fumio pushed beyond likeness and also aim to um, focus on like the expressive interpretation. So if you look at Old Man or Suspended Cat, there's an emphasis um, there's an emphasis on the on observation, like capturing that moment accurately, the volume of the moment, and you can feel the weight of the cat that the model's holding almost. And I would say I need to add how the chapter goes into the fact that modern Japanese sculpture wasn't like my peers have talked about tonight, as well as Professor, of course, Japanese sculpture was not simply Western imitation, and works by Takamura Kun adapted Japanese wood carving traditions to modern subject matter, while Hiraguchi Denshu stayed with wood and Buddhist um, motivations, but produced a powerful, quote, powerful and modern statement in works like Reincarnation. Um, and then with Takamura Kataru and Ogiwara Mori, Rodin's influence is shown um, um, in the self-expression and the subjectivity of the work. And um, down the line, by the time of post-war period, I would say I noticed the evolution opening um, into experiments with combined materials, installation, and abstraction, um, where you see works by Isamu Noguchi, like Mu. Uh, there's a blend of the Zen forms and also biomorphic abstractions. So, all in all, I would describe the change of sculpture across the Meiji period as, um, of course, being informed by realism, and then moving on to an expressive reinterpretation through Japanese materials. And then we see that like inspiration of full modern abstraction with works like Mu.
Thank you, Xavier. And I think I would like to add that although it's like almost like a full-blown modern abstraction, but at the same time, if we look at it closely, the concept, right, the moon, where does it come from? It's Zen Buddhism, right? So it's actually the tradition, the kind of deeply rooted Buddhist ideology actually was reworked, right? It was not just abandoned, they were reworked. Also, the concept of reincarnation also is such an important concept in Buddhism. And then the moon, right? I mean, if you guys remember, right, the paintings, right, the painters, the Zen painters, they did a lot of moon, right? They wrote in calligraphy. But now, Isamu Noguchi used at that time international style, right? But to really to materialize this Zen concept of nothingness, right? So although they are really launching into the international forum in conversation with international abstract art, but they actually are reworking their deeply rooted traditional concept. But thank you. That's definitely a very thorough engagement with the prompt. Awesome. Next, I have Brisa, prompt 3.
Hello.
Hello, Brisa. Do you have camera for your? Can you turn on your camera if you could?
No, I don't have a camera.
Okay, sorry to hear about it. Okay, then please go ahead.
Yes. I just wrote a Bunjinga inspired by Chinese scholar culture depicts calm and poetic landscapes with a focus on personal expression. An example would be Tomioka's Tasai's The Second Visit to the Red Cliffs, which combines painting and poetry. Moving on to Zenga. Zenga is linked to Zen Buddhism and utilizes loose and simplistic brushwork, which was used as a form of meditation practices. And an example would be Nantembo's Durama, which depicts him as a simple head with simplistic facial features, as well as a simple loose brushwork, singular. And Nihonga, which is sometimes referred to as the modern Japanese style painting, was a movement developed in response to the rapid influence of Westernization. And this style uses traditional themes depicted in a more modern realism. And an example would be Kano Hogai's Fudo Mio, if I pronounce that correctly. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you for identifying the artworks in terms of those categories. I wonder whether there's more to be said about the similarities and differences. So I wonder whether Nabil, do you have like a more to say in terms of this prompt? The
Oh,
similarities
yes.
and difference. Yes, go ahead.
You want to hear about the similarities and differences of the style? Let
Yes.
me see if I have that written down. Um,
Do you mind turning on your camera if you could?
oh yeah. Here.
Thank you. Thank
Does
you.
it look good?
Yeah, yes, you look good.
I look good, thank you. All right. I right here I wrote that Zenga and Bunhinga. Uh, Zenga was similar to Bunhinga because they were both like simpler and they tend to have like loose brushwork. Yeah, hold on. That's what I have about similarities, and I think Zenga and Bunhinga were like somewhat similar to each other because they featured like looser brushwork and like yeah. But that's all I wrote about the similarities. Oh, but they do all three styles do attempt to keep their the Japanese identity. And hold on, let me see. Yeah, like for example, like Nihonga was like more detailed than both styles and like incorporated Western like elements of like realism and shading, but while still like trying to maintain a Japanese identity. And I think one example of this would be Fudo Myo by Kano Hogai. Um, I think that's a perfect example of that. And but that's all I have to like to add on that one.
Okay, thank you, Nabil. Any discussions would like to talk about the contact? Were they like made in the same contact, or they were made actually responding to different kind of circumstances? I mean, style definitely we can already. I think it both the two discussed and analyzed very well already, like the difference in terms of style, and the philosophy. I think Brisa definitely mentioned the underlying kind of ideology. Right, they came from different ideological kind of inclination. How about contact? Or for whom they were making their artwork for? Like who were their audience?
Should I jump
Yeah,
in?
please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so for the Bunjinga, a lot of those, from my understanding, works were created for an audience that was like generally highly educated and familiar with like the Confucian classics and Chinese literati history. And like a lot of it was also for that sort of like personal enrichment or academic enrichment and development. So it favored like kind of higher class educated learned audiences. The Zenga paintings were also like teaching tools within Zen Buddhism and even like meditation aids as well. So it was largely aimed at that kind of spiritual community, practitioners of Zen Buddhism. And then for the Nihonga art, a lot of it like was concerned with like kind of cultural preservation, especially in the Meiji era, Meiji period, with the dissemination of so much Japanese cultural export. So a lot of that came out of not entirely a reaction to that, but largely influenced by it to kind of keep developing and preserving Japanese painting tradition.
Okay. Thank you, Shaza, for such a wonderful addition. Indeed, that's really something I want you guys to keep in mind. Is in terms of the content, they actually respond to very different audience, right? And I would actually be bold to say actually Nihonga was actually a reaction against yoga. Okay? So if you look at those paintings were done like in 1887, 1887, 1890, right? And if you look at the yoga, right, they were introduced actually slightly earlier, right? And so it actually Nihonga was as a category, as an artistic category, a new artistic category, right? There was no need to call Japanese painting Japanese painting. Nihonga means Japanese painting, right? There was no need to call it until they felt they were threatened, right? Yeah. So yeah, definitely. Cesar mentioned that there's like effort to preserve, right, Japanese traditional art, and that really was the major kind of contact within which Nihonga was developing. And actually, American scholars played quite important role, right, in formulating, helping, at least initially, in helping the development of Nihonga. Okay, actually, it's quite important message here, or interesting kind of phenomenon here, right? All right, so let's move on to prompt 4. I would like to come back to Nabil. Would you please work on respond to prompt 4?
All right. What defines yoga? How did it evolve? How does it differ from traditional Japanese painting? Support your discussion with artists and works. Okay. I put yoga style is when Japan adopted Western ideas into their art. This includes more detail and realism in their work. Traditional Japanese paintings, they didn't usually feature much three-dimensionality and were often made for religious and political reasons. It started as something that was directly adopted from the West to something that was eventually localized. For example, Kashida Ryusei Reiko with the wooden shawl, 1920. That adopts the Western style of oil on canvas while still maintaining Japanese subject matter. And I think that one's on the slides too. I think you have to scroll down a little more. Yeah, it's that one right there to the left. Yeah.
Can you identify one more artwork?
One more artwork.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What was it called? Flowering Fields? I like that one too. Yeah, the one oh no, it's down more. One, yeah, to the left. I think so. Yeah, Flowering Field.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so as you could see, like in Flowering Field, that's yeah, that's like when it first came to Japan, but then like and the artist was sorry, hold on. Yeah, the artist was a Kuroda Seiki, and he was like a big pioneer for yoga because of the art he studied in France. So yeah, and then it later got localized, as you could see, like in the other paintings where they started having a Japanese subject matter, like the two paintings we see right there.
Thank you, Nabil. I'm glad that I pushed that you get to share Kuroda Saiki's important role in the development.
Yeah, that was a good push. That was a good push. That was good.
Okay, awesome. All right, so let's move on to Simone, prompt 5.
Okay, sorry, I'm gonna just pull it up right quick. So the question is, with 3 examples in different media, analyze the emergence of abstraction in Japan. What inspired this shift? How did it take shape? So the 3 media examples that I decided to analyze would be, well, yeah, the different media I chose. So I split it into 3 categories, of course. So I started with like yoga painting, and I chose the Reclining Woman by Yorozo Tesugoro, which I think clearly has a like Van Gogh type of Fauvism approach to it, giving a more distorted perspective. So it's not so much on the realism side, but it's using realistic figures, if that makes sense. Like we see that it is a woman. She's laying on, I think it's grass, but it's not our every.
I'll show you guys with the image.
I was gonna pull it up because I took pictures of the textbook on my phone. But yes, that's the Reclining Woman. It's more distorted. It's not
more realistic as we start to see in this Meiji period, but it's just coming from a different perspective, and like I said, more Van Gogh type of feel. I also listed calligraphy as also a form of abstraction. The one I like to bring light to is the okitsu, which is the offing. It's more like the orange. I don't know if I don't have it right away, but basically, we know calligraphy to be more of like writing, gestures of writing. Yes, the orange, it's more panels, but calligraphy is also used to make forms. To me, it looks like smears of different things, but it's in the category of abstraction because it's somebody else's perspective and it's in their own way. And I think to twist calligraphy from being writing to more gesture-based art, I think that could be considered for abstraction. And for the last one, I chose uh printmaking, because that's just simple shapes. And for example, like the black cat, which is it looks like an upside down exclamation point with two triangles on the side. So with making, it's more, uh, it's stepping away from realistic forms and going into more just a form, shapes. And I think that is also a form of abstraction because it kind of leaves it up to your imagination. You don't. It says black cat, but that doesn't look like a cat. Um, so I think what initially inspired all of these ones that I listed was just coming into coming into this period and being having a more Western influence. I think it opens the door for a lot more art forms to be explored, and also it opens the door for more expression, like art expression, um, and also more perspective. So what they may see and compared to what others might see, if that makes sense. But yeah, that's what I have for number 5.
Okay, thank you, Simone, for covering three types, like different mediums. Yeah, and we also can see in other mediums such as sculpture and architecture, even architecture, right? Isn't it amazing? Really, I mean, Japanese artists were determined to be part of the international conversations, right? Because at the time, abstract art was big, was on the rise, right? So in Japanese the art world, or at least those who are really active, they want to be part of the international conversations. This is, actually very well-known structural expressionist style, right? And Japan actually was among the pioneering, international artists who were actually, or Japanese artists, some of them were among the pioneering artists to explore new way of expressing ideas, and including even architecture, which is supposedly is going to be functional, right? But they also explore, the experiment, like with abstraction. So the desire to raise international visibility actually is really a big thing at this time. Although, right, on the one hand, they really want to preserve, right, traditional, the essence of Japanese identity, right, the cultural identity, and at the same time, they also want to increase their international visibility, right? And that's where there's institutional transformation, introducing international exhibitions, right? Building top scale museums, right, to showcase artworks from Japan and from abroad. And then also there's this effort in participating in the newest art formats, the newest subject matter, right, the newest materials. Okay, all right, great. Let's move on to prompt 6, and I have Nicole. Nicole, if you're here, please unmute yourself.
Hi there. So what makes an artwork modern for so originally, like the modern art was like an art movement from, I believe, the 50s and 60s when people were challenging the notion of what can be considered art. Um, and some forms of media for um, modern art in Japan include photography and editing, like such as uh, uh, uh,
Nico, are you still speaking? We cannot hear
yeah,
you.
I'm still speaking.
Okay.
The purpose of these modern art was to challenge the notions, but also break taboos. One of the arts.
Do you have other examples? So you point out the photography, the medium, right? One medium. What are other mediums that you were thinking about?
During this time, there was um like graphic design, like for the offset poster for an exhibition.
Do you have another example? Hello, Nico.
Uh, yeah.
I guess it's okay. Maybe we can hear from someone else. This is actually super important question apparently. So I really wanna we have like a thorough conversation for this prompt, right? So may I invite another maybe Sevilla? What do you have to say in terms for this prompt? What makes
Okay. Hello again. So my first example that I'll offer, I liked uh Offing. We can talk about Offing by Morita Shiryu. Is that was that in the slides?
It's not exactly. I have a kind of
I can
related
pick a
one.
different example.
Yeah. But this and this, they're actually quite similar.
Oh, there you go. Yep,
Yeah.
yeah.
So similar.
So it's a monochromatic four panel screen piece painting, and it's lacquer pigment and lacquer on gold leafed paper, and there's a figure that looks almost like a cow. Um, and I would say this piece, so this was a part of the post-war part of the chapter, and this piece becomes modern because it dissolves. Um, so look at the brushwork of the dark figures, resembles that of calligraphy, that style of painting. And instead of using that specific medium in the traditional sense that we're used to seeing be reinterpreted, it's taken a familiar media and form or familiar media and technique and applying it with a different, let's a more self-conscious approach in terms of being aware of the medium, um, being open to foreign models, and really throwing in the emphasis on um, the artist's own personal uh, like identity almost. Um, and if we look at Kuroda Seiki's Morning Toilet, that painting is modern because um, it's traditional in the sense that it's oil medium and inspired by Western nudes, um, but becomes modern because it in Japan in the cultural context of putting this type of work in Japan, um, it tested what was publicly shown, accepted and seen as fine art, um, but also accepted as being a formative piece of what Japanese art was becoming. And for another medium, sculpture, if we look at Hand again by Kotaro, um, it's modern in the sense that I would say it's not trying to replicate modern in the sense that the artist didn't create an anatomically accurate work of art for the sake of being able to produce such a creation, but is it a mudra? It resembles um I think the fact that it's just informed by religious iconography and meshing that with the traditional technique of the medium is the modernization of the modern identity of that work, I would say.
Okay, so Sevilla, in your understanding, being more than really is located in artist's personal kind of choice, personal identity, right? Personal kind of preference of style and the medium and expression. Is that like, am I saying characterizing your understanding of being more than accurately?
Mm-hmm.
It's mainly located in artist's personal kind of desire, personal preference, right? Their personal like choice, their determination, right? To be a modern person, to get to decide on what kind of style I want to pursue, what kind of message I want to convey. Is that right? Okay, all right. Thank you. And great. So can I hear from another discussion about what's your interpretation of what makes an artwork modern? Shazad, do you have, I'm sure you have thought over about this problem. So do you mind sharing what you have?
Yeah, it's actually very similar to what you just said. Like the way I was choosing to define modern in this context was works where the artists are more free to explore and combine differing and sometimes disparate artistic traditions, as well as free to choose the subject matter they want to engage with and how. Whereas like before like modern quote unquote Japanese art, artists were more relegated within certain schools or traditions in both style and subject matter generally, with like developments happening over a long gradual period. So like to exemplify like the form, I pulled Mu by Isamu Noguchi, um, which is like very much pulling from this like abstract expressionist tradition where it's like attempting to make marks or form without referencing any other tradition. Um, which like you can debate that at a separate time, but it was like a radical departure from Japanese artistic tradition. Um, to depict like modern concepts, the Hinomaru illumination, I don't know if we have a picture of it in this slide. Um, the Amaterasu and Haniwa like installation piece. Conceptually, it tackles like a new or kind of a taboo that hadn't really been touched before, especially with or regarding Japanese nationalism. So even though this one's using like really traditional imagery with the Haniwa figures and this kind of abstraction of the sun that very much is meant to resemble like the Japanese flag, conceptually put together, it's like tackling new subject matter that hadn't really been addressed before or not very thoroughly, that in Japanese nationalism. And then in content too, like with the lifting of a lot of like government restrictions, artists were free to like take on new content as well. So I pulled the Tennoji and Yanaka Tokyo by Kobayashi Kiyochika. It was the prince with like the skull, I believe, like the three skeletal figures. Um, but like even though it's like a woodblock print, and even though it's like a lot of the imagery and kind of style is like relatively traditional or building upon tradition, the content within it was very modern because it was like a satirical critique of the Meiji government trying to like control nudity. Oh, I think it was further down.
Further down? I thought it was maybe, yeah. It's
Did we scroll?
Oh,
Oh,
here.
that one. Yeah.
Mhm.
That print on the right. A lot of the imagery is like kind of referencing screen or woodblock printing traditions. Um, but like the actual content that it depicts is like this satirical critique of government that is like newly allowed. Um, so yeah, those are the examples I pulled.
Thank you for really expanding on right what another work can be considered as be modern, right? Thank you. I wonder whether any discussion would like to add to join the conversation about what you consider to be modern. Do you guys think in the context of Japan at that time, is this considered modern? Kano Hokkai's Fudomyo? Do you think it considered modern?
I would say I would say modern. Can you zoom into it for us?
Say it again.
Are you able to zoom into the image for us?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Sorry. Modern, yes, because of the formal um it's not tra it's not traditional because it's using techniques that and applying them to familiar like iconography, I feel like.
The subject matter is traditional, right?
Hmm.
But the technique, the style, were
Hmm.
considered modern at the time, right? Because they
Hmm.
were introduced from the West, right? And Nihonga at the time was understood as a modern Japanese painting, so it was considered modern. Maybe from our contemporary perspective, it's not modern, but from the context of Japan at the time, it was considered modern because being Western was considered being modern at the time, right? And the category of Nihonga was explicitly right, combining traditional Japanese subject matter and theme with the so-called modern technique. And at the time, modern technique referred to the imported right European, in this case realism, right, perspective, shading, lighting, and shading. So these would be considered as modern artwork.
I love looking at the White Clouds, Red Leaves work
Mm-hmm.
because it's uh, s- obviously derivative of the landscape, ink landscapes, the use of I forget the technical term for um, when there's different value to show depth in the landscapes.
Is
So
it
that's still being
gradation?
Perspective?
Gradation? Oh, go ahead. Somebody was saying something.
it's more of a scientific term
Okay.
because it
Atmospheric
exists in nature. Ashley?
atmospheric perception or
They,
atmospheric
yes.
it's something
Thank
about the
yes,
atmosphere. Yeah.
yes, yes. So
Atmospheric. Mhm.
so the atmospheric perspective still being applied, but it also the the landscape's being treated with a Western lens because look at the texture, like eh, but it doesn't depict nature like for what it is though. So it's still very original, not being it's not trying to be Western landscape. It's still holding on to the authenticity of Japanese taste and and it's all and all of that like intersection um just creates what we're looking at now and it can you cannot find this like in any other you cannot find this exact style in like any other period almost. It's so very distinct.
Thank you, Xavier. Yeah, I definitely like that you pointed out the effort is trying to capture and articulate the Japanese kind of taste, like a in a way that's considered to be more, up to date, right?
Hmm.
More articulate, right?
In a way, this is something I would almost see as contemporary, like up to date work, and was it's really ahead of its time almost, like um, when you look at it,
Thank you,
and
Xavier.
in my opinion, far ahead of like the aesthetic of what was going on in the West that they were being inspired by. So it's like they like reinvented it like times 10 almost.
Wow. That's a very strong, right, compliment. Thank you for sharing your strong opinion on that. Great. Anyone else has anything to say about the what's being modern, right?
Could I add onto what
Go
Xavier
ahead.
was talking
Yeah.
about specifically the red leaves? Just
Yeah.
like to expand on like the formal qualities of it.
Yeah.
Like
Okay. Wonderful.
you can see that in the painting that it's less calligraphy based. Like you can see a more attention to it being painterly, but still holding on to the tradition of the subject matter. Because it is like when you look at that, you're gonna be called back to the Zen calligraphy, Sumi ink paintings. But you're also gonna look at this and be like, it almost gives the feel of oil painting to me. I don't know if they used oil painting for this, but
No, but definitely they were inspired by
yeah,
oil painting. But the effort is let's still use traditional Japanese materials, but we make like this kind of art that actually can compete with oil painting. That was actually one of the main motivation behind the development of Nihonga.
and you can see like for the practice, or when I think of Zen ink painting, and even for while I was trying to do it in my own practice for the project, is the act of Zen ink making. It's like there's also an emphasis on the doing it, the practice of doing it, the movement of your hand while doing it. It's like almost I don't know, like a ritual or something, but like it's very different approach than what I think these paintings are having. Like I don't know. Like
Thank
it's
you,
I
actually.
can't see the
Yeah.
strokes as much as I could before.
And Luis was raising his hand, so please go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to say, well, coming back to the question of, what we consider modern, I think that, all of these pieces of work that we have seen in this chapter, are modern because they are mainly focused, we are seeing it through the lens of the Western style, so and Western, themes as well. So, for example, in the case of, and if you go back to page number 6, for the Yoyogi Stadium. I don't think before we had even like a stadium before. So it was really like outstanding for me to see that they have developed so much to the point where they're even making like these giant buildings thanks to and I say the American technique of steel reinforced concrete, which wasn't there before. So it was the fact that this type of building was kind of like one of the major modernizations in terms of architecture, and it is also the fact of it, of the unorthodox style that it had before, because since it was thanks to the fact that the international style was going on for the large cities, trying to rebuild the houses and towers due to the post-war occupation in 1952 that allowed new renovations of this Western type of building to make it more you know to actually experiment and try to redesign the Japanese infrastructure in a manner that actually showcase how much they actually are adapting to their to the Western world. And in this case, for that one, it is also, as a way to see that, hey, we as Japan, we're showing you that we have the potential of being this first world nation because we're adapting so rapidly compared to, other places or, other concepts. So I don't know. I feel like these type of buildings, really showcase what modernism was for Japan.
Thank you, Luis. You actually bring up two very important points, or even more than two, right? Yeah, at that time, I mean, modernity also can be not only in style, right, in artist's personal conception about what kind of art I'm going to make for myself or for the world that I'm part of, but also it is located in the medium, like materials, like using concrete and steel that were not there considered, right, more than. Also in new institutions like a library, like school, like stadium, right, they were not there. So when you participate in the construction of this kind of new infrastructure, you also consider that being participating in the modern project, right? So being modern can be located in many places, like in material, in medium, in infrastructure, in institution, in style, right? And then in where you participate, in maybe where you exhibit your work, right? And that's also, so actually it's very wide range of aspects that we are talking about here, and that's what actually Mason tried really to get crossed over. Right, spin modeling is actually very complex. Like it covers so many aspects. So thank you all for really coming prepared and for your readiness to join the conversation. And we really dive into the key points and development of this chapter. So I hope you guys feel satisfied, right, with all our presenters and including summarizers and discussants. So thank you all.